Good evening, dear friends. This is the 15th video of the Divine Order and the Universe Reading and Commentary series. And this evening, dear Tümerhan Meral joins me as the new commentator.
Good evening.
Yes, I know you very well, dear Tümerhan, but please introduce yourself to our friends.
I am joining this series from Adana. I am a member of the Adana Spiritual Research Society and also a member of the MISRS since 1994. I am a mechanical engineer. And since I became a member of these societies, I was hoping to see the day this awaited book becomes public. And I am grateful that I saw that day. We received this gift from the spiritual plan, and since 2013, both in Adana, Izmir and Istanbul we study the divine order and the universe, and we share our comments and insights, more correctly, whatever we could understand, in our inner studies, public lectures.
Thank you. You and your brother Bilyay, both of you closely follow the latest developments in science, and your explanations provide us with useful insights and ideas while we study this book. So, together, we will be reading and commenting on the divine order and the universe, together for a while. Welcome, again. And I start reading from the page we stopped last week. Now, we will start explaining how the hydrogen atom has developed until entering the stage of being. We have stated that below the hydrogen state there is an endless milieu of mechanical development and evolution. This milieu, as we have said, is a dark field making up a disarrayed whole, akin to an amorphous state. The original influences, after constituting the initial nucleus in this dark milieu, by gathering other parts around it, bring out increasingly more complex, more complicated and more developed states. And the original influence, in the center of the matter constitution which has been brought out in this way, after being used within this constitution, starts again to radiate from that matter to the outside, as its original state is lost and its quality is changed, and we call it the magnetic field of that body. So, all spheres and constitutions of the hydrogen cosmos, from its smallest parts to its largest systems, occur in this way. After the initial hydrogen nucleus is constituted as such, by developing in the way we mentioned above, it eventually reaches the stage of the hydrogen H atom known by chemistry. To the initial hydrogen atom constituted under the governance of the original influences as such, until its utmost stages of development, that is, until it reaches the state of being, only the original influence and the influences belonging to the spirit that is connected to that atom arrive. That is, of the original influences, which we will later explain as we talk about influences, the parts belonging to spirits that we call evolutionary values and the parts belonging to matter that we call prime influence, arrive. Therefore, the motions in the structures of these atoms are only under the governance of the sublime original influence. Spirits, by passively drifting, adapting to these motions, render their mechanical automatic evolution. This is a kind of passive adaptation stage of the evolution. At this stage, influences belonging to other beings that we call secondary influences do not arrive at the structures of atoms. Actually, because the freedom and comprehension of spirits are not in question here, the tests and trials belonging to further stages do not exist. They only have to automatically adapt the regularly progressing and increasingly complex motions of atoms. And while adapting these complicated motions of atoms more and more, they are preparing for the stage of being. However, gathering various kinds of hydrogen atom to bring out various objects is necessary for the development of beings. So, to these compounds and combinations of atoms, known by mankind as objects, secondary influences arrive from the beings in duty, again, under the sublime control of the unitary, and these render various formations, deformations, and transformations in these objects. Nevertheless, unlike what is the case for atoms, no more direct prime influences descend to these compounds. Instead, secondary influences prevail. And of course, these are always under the control of original influences. Yes, we now are going deeper into the topic of influences. Please begin, Tümerhan.
In the videos you made with Bilyay, I had noticed that there was a confusion about the amorphous matter as you read those first pages from the book. By now, I think this topic is much clearer for our friends. Yes, the book's opening pages begin with explanations about matter. The book describes amorphous matter as the first state of matter, and in this description, the book expresses some properties of this, and the most significant property of matter is that matter is absolutely motionless. And the book repeats many times that we human must accept this like this because our comprehension cannot grasp it. Why? Because we can only understand motion. Why? Because the universe is in constant motion, an environment of activation. And we humans, both with our minds and with our man-made gadgets, try to measure this activity. To the extent we can measure, we say this exists. And the rest, the above and below this extent which we cannot measure, we used to say it does not exist. Thankfully, now we got rid of this total exclusion. Now, we say we cannot measure this. And what did lead us to this change? The experiments done in CERN. Why? Because we could measure only some crude particles. I say crude, but of course even they were subatomic particles, but still they were large. But in these experiments, we understood that faster these particles are made to collide each other, smaller the particles emerge. Faster the collide, smaller the particles. So, it is understood that there is no such thing that this or that does not exist because it would be wrong. And what do we say now? We say, we could discover these so far. And what else exists above and below? The scientists are still trying to discover and understand. Now, to the hydrogen stage. We read here. We have stated that below the hydrogen state there is an endless milieu of mechanical development and evolution. And as it is mentioned many times, this is akin to amorphous because it is not amorphous anymore. Even though it is too slight for us, there is a state of motion. Again I read. This milieu, as we have said, is a dark field making up a disarrayed whole, akin to an amorphous state. And again, it is called dark here because we couldn't yet have any information about this. Let me read a previous passage first so we can understand this part better, because I guess we will go deeper into the topic soon. As mentioned before, in the universe, this initial stage, ruled by the mechanical evolution principle, is only composed of an infinite, dark, disarrayed and amorphous milieu which is the substage of hydrogen atom. Evolution here has been connected to a completely mechanical system. At this stage, matter is not gathered but disarrayed. Let's try to take these words here into our minds because we will play a clip and these words may give us more meaning symbolically. Yes, matter is not gathered but disarrayed. I read. Because the spirits, which at this stage are only rendering mechanical applications, have not yet attained the power to gather matter. In the previous videos, you had discussed this. Spirit, within this milieu of disarrayed matter, if the simile is apt, was hopping from one matter particle to another matter particle and bringing out some motions. And again, if you remember, the development of matter in this stage was faster than the evolution of spirits.
Yes, there are symbolic phrases like, they are plunged in and out of matter.
Exactly. I read. Because the spirits, which at this stage are only rendering mechanical applications, have not yet attained the power to gather matter. Because of this, these simple spirits follow a primal path of evolution which is endlessly mechanical and impossible for mankind to understand, drifting by jumping from this matter to that matter, without connecting any matter, due to the sublime necessities of original sources, amidst the disarrayed, formless matter of this primal milieu. And here, as they are evolving passively, after a long cycle that seems like eternity, some of these spirits slowly become advanced enough in their evolution to gather this disarrayed matter. See, here, this phrase is important, they become advanced enough to gather the disarrayed matter. Gathering this disarrayed matter. This is what is called mass increase in physics. I read. As a ground for the following evolution of a spirit that has reached such a state, an influence comes from the unitary upon a point within this amorphous milieu. Again, another important point. Why? Because we saw that some of our friends who studied the book sent us some drawings they made, showing as if the original principle or influences enters into universe from outside of it. However, there is no such thing. Please don't forget this. Influences entering the universe must be filtered through the unitary. They must first enter the unitary. And after filtered through the unitary, influences are conveyed to matter parts in accordance to their needs. So, let's remember this. Influences coming from the original principle first enter the unitary, and after filtering through the unitary, they arrive at the point they must reach. Now, in your videos with Bilgehan, of course, I was watching. He has mentioned the Higgs field. And as we emphasize this word, gathering, this is the most significant state of the research the physicists do on how the matter gain mass. Yes, there are many particles, okay, but how the mass emerged? There was no answer to this question, but Peter Higgs had theorized and wrote the equations, and he said there must be a particle for this state. And in 2012, in the experiments done in CERN, the Higgs field is discovered. And the book also states that this is a field. In a few minutes, we will be discussing in detail how a field occurs around a nucleus. For me, since the first time I read this book, there was an association made in my mind about this. Of course, we have been following the new developments in science before this book is disclosed. We were trying to find the overlaps between the new developments in science and the healing, body-mind-spirit connections, spiritualism. So, this association I made was the strings as the building blocks of matter. Here is the image I want to show you. I hope this image will explain more. Yes, the string theory says that the main components of the reality is made up of tiniest strings. These strings vibrate at the resonate frequencies and at Planck length. To visualize this length, let's write 35 zeros to the left side of number 10. That's small strings this theory talks about. We already know that protons, neutrons and electrons made up of atoms. This theory says, the building blocks of these protons and neutrons are the quarks. And those quarks are made up of these tiniest strings or membranes that vibrating. You can see these in this image at the below. And these make up quarks, which are shown as purple dots. And in turn, these quarks make up the protons and neutrons that make up the nuclei of atom. As you can see, we are still talking about the states and particles, or matter parts, which the book states as this are not the hydrogen atom you mankind knows. And these atoms make up the molecules, and in turn molecules make up the matters we can observe in the hydrogen realm. Yes, these sentences in the book about this disarrayed dark and akin to amorphous field reminds me this string theory. Of course, we cannot surely say that this is this. Thankfully, science renew itself every day. What science call today as certain, tomorrow can be called a maybe, and what is a maybe today can be a proven fact tomorrow. Still, this is a strong association.
Of course, science tries to understand the material universe, how it emerges, what is its structure, etc. by certain theories. And to prove all those theories, there are so many research and experiments are being done. And for what? To understand matter. And with our brains, we humans can only understand things by models or diagrams or figures of them. And as our knowledge advances, these models, diagrams and figures will change. Maybe such discoveries will be in science that we will understand the divine order and the universe much better.
Exactly. The things we talk about right now are related with the facts of today, but what will be these 10 years later? We are waiting with curiosity, hoping that discoveries to be made that challenge our minds.
When we compare what we knew in physics in 1959 with what we know now, we have more capacity to understand what we read in the divine order and the universe. Especially, in the last decade or in last 2 years, with the experiments in CERN, discoveries increased.
Exactly. Now, we will play a clip. Before this, let me say something. In the book we read that formation, that is gathering of matter, occurs as the prime influences land in a point in the disarrayed amorphous milieu. Of course we don't know this point, then bring out a nucleus, and via this nucleus the other matter parts get gathered around it, and as a result of this gathering, this activity, its magnetic field occurs. This is the sequence stated in the book. And this is the most logical sequence. We recently can easily observe and find evidence of this sequence in our astronomical cosmos by the developments in astronomy in the last 3 or 5 years. We know that astronomical objects revolve around another central object. We, on Earth and other planets, revolve around Sunday. Our star revolves around another system, Milky Way galaxy revolves around a central object. All of these always revolve around a heavier or denser object. So, this is also valid for the micro scale. The book tells us in these parts we read. First, a nucleus emerges. Some gathering around it occurs, and as a result of this gathering a magnetic field emerges. It is so recent that we could observe black holes. Beforehand we didn't know that we are revolving around a black hole, but now we know it. Previously, in the Newtonian physics, we were saying it is because of gravitational force. Now we observe that this is a gravitational field. That dense objects, we can say nucleus, how these nuclei bend the spacetime and how other objects revolve around these, we know it very well now, and the book explains how the same happens in the micro realm. A nucleus emerges, and around this nucleus particles gather, and this gathering leads to a magnetic field. Now, this video clip you watch may help you, as a simile, to understand how prime influence lands at this field of disarrayed matter, which is akin to amorphous matter. When I first watched this clip, it reminded me these parts in the book we read this evening. Why? Because what I watched in this experiment setting had similar characteristics with what I read. In the center there is a power supply, a motor, and it provides the vibration, a frequency, and it brings out motion. As you see at the simple or low frequencies, simple patterns emerge on the plate, but as the frequencies or vibrations increase, more complex patterns emerge. So, I saw similarities between this and this gathering of disarrayed and akin to amorphous matter parts. I hope it was useful for our friends.
Summarily, we see here when an influence sent or the frequency increases, some formations occur around a central point via that magnetic field. A friend wrote a question: if we are in the suitable frequency, can we influence matter? What we saw in this video is a symbolic way of seeing how the frequencies, be it low or high, or the magnetic fields, be it weak or strong, form, deform or transform matter. I mean, all of these, right now, is happening in our bodies as well as in our emotions, thoughts and feelings. Microcosmos and macrocosmos continue like this. Yet, the parts of the book we read and discuss this evening is about the stage way before our manifest realm emerged, way before the beings where our hydrogen realm becomes manifest. It may be beneficial to remind our friends that we are now discussing a very early stage. However, we see that the fundamental principle is same. And what we read in the book is after these gathering of matter parts has a magnetic field, they begin to emit this influence. So, we can say about our own magnetic fields that influences coming from our beings makes a gathering in a center point, and after that, as these influences are reflected to outside, our magnetic fields occur. And what we emit outside from our magnetic fields can be measured or detected, let's say by a bioresonance tool. Anything you want to add?
I can only remind our friends that the clip we watch is only a symbolic simile to express this gathering of these disarrayed and akin to amorphous matter parts around a nucleus. And as you said, this goes on in the same way in our lives. More this nucleus is developed, consolidated and able to receive stronger influences, greater its magnetic field is.
And the book establishes this fundamental principle by stating so, all spheres and constitutions of the hydrogen cosmos, from its smallest parts to its largest systems, occur in this way.
Yes. And in astronomy and physics we know that the first stage of emergence for all stars and all planets is this kind of dense milieu of matter. And later, as we were taught in the elementary school, within this gigantic cloud of gas and dust, other matter particles start to gather and motion begins.
We will later discuss evolutionary values. So, we now have new concepts to learn and discuss in detail. This is the main property of this book. First, we read a concept, then this concept is explained and later more concepts are added to it to explain it in a wider context. First, we read the original influence, then we read that it has two parts, one belonging to spirits and called as evolutionary values, and another belonging to matter and called as prime influence. And after the constitution of an atom, the original influence in this nucleus changes its original state and begins to radiate outside of the atom, and atom's magnetic field emerges.
And additionally, the word structure is used here to imply the forming of atoms. But the book emphasizes that in this stage, the motions and the structures of these atoms are only under the governance of the sublime original influence. No secondary influences arrive at the structures of these atoms from other beings.
So, we see here that spirits are still in that passive adaptation to matter. And another important point here is, because the spirits are still not connected to matter at this stage, there is no freedom and comprehension is in question for them. Yet in the following stages, as the spirits gradually become experienced in gathering and dispersing, in forming and deforming matter, their tests and trials will begin because value differentiation will happen and their experience will lead to comprehension. And as the matter gets developed, the structure of atoms will become increasingly complex. But still, Here we read that spirits are still in the stage of adaptation to matter in an automatic manner. Spirit has not yet reached the state of being. Later we will read how the proto-hydrogen atom will emerge, but it will still be a simple atom compared to the hydrogen atom we know today. Because the hydrogen atom we know today is much more developed than this simpler version. And developed means here that it became more able to receive more influences into its structure and become more complex, hence, transmitted more influences into its vicinity. And the book makes a very clear distinction between the development of matter and the evolution of spirits. They advance in tandem. Still, all of this doesn't happen suddenly, at once or in a moment. This is a very long stage, like an eternity. All right, shall we continue reading? The structure of the initial hydrogen atom, as just mentioned, continues its development only under the governance of original influences, until it reaches the state of being and elements occur, which are developed states of hydrogen atom, known by mankind by such names as oxygen, silver, platinum, lead, radium, etc. Of these, mankind could only recognize about 100, but their numbers exceed 100. Again, as we have said, the transformation of the hydrogen atom into higher elements occurs only by the efficacy of the original influences. Thus, after ensuring the development of matter up until the stage of being, from that moment on, prime influences do not directly arrive at being, only influences from the spirit it is subject to, or more correctly from the part of the original influence belonging to spirit, and influences from beings which are in various evolutionary stages in universe arrive, and we call the former secondary influences. So, with all these influences, that being starts going through the tests, trials and experiences which are necessary for its evolution and encounters many possibilities. Amidst these evolutionary possibilities, which are gradually developing, increasing and encompassing, in order to accomplish its doings in the universe, that being sets out on its long journey of evolution. As of necessity for its evolution, with the secondary influences arriving from these beings in duty, as we have just mentioned, out of various elements of hydrogen atom endless combinations are constituted and myriad objects are made up. And by various formations occurring through the assembly and dispersion of these objects within infinite variations, large and small objects, matter combinations, bodies, miscellaneous matter that fill up the worlds, and finally worlds and systems are constituted. All of these are done with innumerable secondary influences sent by beings in duty and who exist at every stage, under the light of original influences filtrating from the unitary. Therefore, secondary influences cannot intervene in the structure of atom. It is completely under the governance of prime influences. However, all kinds of combinations of atom elements can be built or dispersed by the secondary influences arriving from beings in duty, which are naturally in large or small scale according to the degrees of beings that are at various levels of evolution.
In the first paragraph we read, until the initial hydrogen atom reaches the state of being and elements occur, which are developed states of hydrogen atom, known by mankind by such names as oxygen, silver, platinum, lead, radium, etc. Of these, mankind could only recognize about 100, but their numbers exceed 100. Now, considering the fact that this book is compiled in 1959, when we study the periodic table back then, there are 101 or 102 elements. And even one of them is mentioned as centurium. Later this element's name is changed, but now we know that, just as the book mentions, the number of the elements in the periodic table is 118, I think. You can see in this image the sources of these elements. We know that the first element in this table is the hydrogen atom, known by chemistry. Now, we are leaving the unknown stage of the development of matter and entering the known stage. Yes, after the nucleus of the proto-hydrogen is formed, through more and more development, it reached the stage, the hydrogen atom we know. From this point on, this atom should gather more matter, hence, increase the energies and influences it receives and in turn, increase the energies and influences it emits, that we can talk about development of matter. Because of this, these atoms must go through from one state to another state. For example, the passing from hydrogen to helium occurs in stars which are small or average size, just like our Sun. Some elements occur in the collisions of cosmic rays. Some occur in the high-mass stars. But all of these occur by the nuclear reactions, by the nuclear fissions. And there are elements occur in supernovas. And you may notice that radioactive elements have more mass and their proton and neutron and electron numbers are more than another. And just take a look at the radioactive elements, they have an interesting property. Imagine that there is a matter but some parts of this matter vanish after a certain time. Where those parts of this matter went? If we could observe this a few hundred years ago, we could think this is magic or something else. Had someone observed this and talked about this in the Middle Ages, we could burn them as witches or heretics. Today, we know where this vanished matter went. We say that this matter radiated, it emitted radiation. Let's say, gamma radiations. In short, we see here that matter, by these radioactive elements, gradually gets developed towards a higher level energy state, and we observe this happens in rarely observed supernova explosions and in the radiations of radioactive elements. And there are also man-made elements which occurred artificially in the colliders. But what is fundamental for all of these? Starting from the hydrogen to the latest discovered ones, all of them emerge in our universe, in our astronomical cosmos. And, here, there is another thing. In our planet, we have precious elements, precious metals, don't we? All of these are materials or matters that emerged back then in various types of stars and dispersed into the greater space by innumerable collisions and explosions. And this led to such a state that, the secondary influences emerge, plans in duty emerge. Such a gathering is in question that, in accordance of in which planet, which elements are needed and had to be gathered in which ratios, these are gathered and integrated in the spacetime, and as the book explains, spheres, celestial objects, stars, planets emerge. And all of these are under the control of these secondary influences and plans in duty.
The book explains the difference in these stages very clearly. In the previous stage, in the forming of the initial atom, the original influences prevail. Later, in this stage, as the complexity of all these gatherings, dispersing, formations and deformations increase and elements, nebulae, galaxies, stars and planets emerge, the beings in duty play roles in making these matter more complex by the secondary influences. So, the book explains this mechanism as it lists the known elements by humankind, such as silver, platinum, lead, radium, etc. These elements became cruder but their conductivity. In other words, they become more able to respond to the incoming influences in better and more complex manner. Here, again, I'd like to remind our friends to watch the previous videos in this series because we already discussed all these concepts of fineness and crudeness, complexity and simplicity.
One more thing I'd like to add. The book repeatedly states that, in the structure of the atom original influences prevail, and this structure is closed to the secondary influences coming from the plans in duty and from other beings. For example, in quantum physics, there are states we cannot comprehend. The simplest of these incomprehensible states is the matter is located in many places at the same time. You and had shared images of this state of matter in your previous videos. We see that in a double-slit experiment, an electron goes through two slits, in other words, it exists in two different locations at the same time. How is it possible? This is a state which cannot be explained or understood by our spatial or temporal understanding. The reason for this incomprehensible state is that our temporal perception or time comprehension which our minds and brains are bound to is different than the time comprehension of the original influences that prevail in the structure of atom. We humans in the astronomical cosmos or hydrogen realm are always under the governance of the secondary influences. We are used to this. We always assess things subjectively. I mean, we make a value judgment by comparing one thing with another thing, and in this way, we arrive at a result. However, in the structure of the atom this is not in question. There, only original influences prevail, and more we make discoveries about the structure of the atom, more we are baffled because it responds to our influences or observations beyond our comprehension and predictions.
Yes, let's continue reading. The structure of the hydrogen atom, which is increasing, developing more and more from its most primitive state, gains as much as motion, power, and efficacy. And spirits connected to these, as they adapt to these motions which are increasingly enriched and powered, evolve. Factors that awoke all these motions in matter are influences arriving from original sources. This is because influences render their functions by evoking motions in matter. In short, the original influences which constitute hydrogen atoms in accordance with the necessities they carry, by continuously collecting parts from surroundings, develop the hydrogen atom up to a higher realm. Naturally, by its development, the energies of the hydrogen atom will radiate and increase, growing stronger accordingly. And as the hydrogen atom develops, it starts to diffuse higher and more complex energies, that is, more developed particles. However, all of these constitute matter still belonging to the initial stage of hydrogen atom. Here, let us mention that this development of hydrogen does not occur in a manner of a sketchy accumulation of atom nuclei within an atom by preserving their separate identities. The values accumulating in the atom under the governance of original influences make up the structure of a hydrogen atom, which characterizes its quality at that moment by fusing in complete harmony and equilibrium, but without becoming united.
We see that there is not a preservation of separate identities or unification of matter parts, but there is a fusing of matter parts in complete harmony and equilibrium. And this is what happens exactly in the nuclear reactions that lead to the emergence of elements we have just mentioned. Yes, as the helium emerges, two hydrogen atoms is gathered, but they do not come and remain as two distinct hydrogen atom, but under extreme heat and pressure they fuse, and in the original time comprehension, a new matter or element emerge which we call helium. A matter in a higher level becomes formed. As you read this last passage, my mind made another association. We see that the spirits utilize the all possibilities of the matter universe can provide them with, and spirits need this, and they have the ability to utilize these. Yet, we see here that, I will say this in worldly terms, there is no Jacobinism or fascist approach. I mean, spirits are not assigned as governors to matter right away. On the contrary, spirits begin as simple or novice when they enter the universe, and they need to learn and experience the simplest states and fields of matter, at first, passively, as the book states. Later, by these passive impressions and experience they gain, their power of influence increase, but they remain as observers for a long period of time. In the later stages, spirits will become evolved enough to govern matter, first by reaching the state of being, and later via influencing this being, it will govern the bodies the beings build, and after the stage of incarnations, it will be governing matter by taking duties in the plan of duty. But before all of these stages, spirits begin from the square one in the matter universe, passively begin to discover how this mechanism works. And as the spirits gradually reach the state of being, then they begin to intervene matter.
Yes, the book summarized what we previously read and discussed. And, as you said, the important point the book makes here is, this gathering of matter parts is not like making a structure by connecting different colored Lego pieces. Those hydrogen atoms are fused and a new element occurs, but still in a harmony and equilibrium. As they gather and fused, the values in their structures increase, and consequently, their complexity increase. Shall we continue reading? All matter has magnetic fields. The magnetic field of such a developed atom is not simple as it is in the initial hydrogen nucleus. Because there are many particles in a hydrogen atom which is made up of compositions of hydrogen nuclei and each particle has a magnetic field, the magnetic field of this developed atom is made up of synthesis of the magnetic fields of the parts which constitute it. We call this field magnetic field synthesis. These magnetic fields of matter are very important. 4. All their relations with each other and with beings are provided through these magnetic fields, and the secondary influences arriving at these fields, according to their intensity, power and direction, can render, under the rules of the duality principle and value differentiation mechanism, myriad changes, metamorphoses, deformations, dispersions and congregations in the structures of matter to which they, magnetic fields, are subject. Similarly, the utilizing of matter by beings, who are able to put these into various states, is done in this way. Beings in duty, utilizing the Earth's magnetic field which is encompassing and vast, naturally in that ratio, by sending miscellaneous influences to this field, generate large or small natural phenomena on Earth. Like this, influences coming from a being with far superior comprehension, who is influential on these magnetic fields, generate much larger results upon the matter belonging to them. Basically, motions that may influence states and situations of worlds, systems, suns in this way are only the deeds of very sublime plans. And of course, these are controlled in accordance with the necessities of the original principle. Wherever matter exists, it is imperative that there exists a magnetic field. After all, the knowledge we have previously given about the constitution of magnetic field makes it easy to understand this truth. So, as an atom has a magnetic field, so do all developmental stages of an atom, that is, of elements, of objects composed of these elements, of worlds, of systems, and also of nebulae, of cosmoses, of beings that have magnetic field syntheses, which are more or less encompassing, more or less complex in comparison with each other. And above all, the magnetic field of the unitary which consists of the whole universe is single. There is no magnetic field synthesis there. 4. In the unitary, the existence of separate and distinctive beings or components is out of the question.
First of all, this passage mentions many points. The point we know and sure of is that every matter has a magnetic field. Previously we made a sequence and said that what makes up the magnetic field is the motions in matter. Therefore, in our universe, there is no matter without motion. Everything is matter and everything is in motion. Because there is nothing without motion and the magnetic field is a result of motion, in the matter universe, from the smallest to most sublime, each part has a magnetic field. The magnetic fields are the resultant of each particle's magnetic fields, which is termed as magnetic field synthesis, and the book will mention these as organs and organizations. We observe this synthesis in our bodies. All of our organs have their magnetic field, and as you have mentioned, by the bioresonance tools these can be measured. And as the resultant of all those magnetic fields of our organs, our body has a magnetic field. And we will read in the next paragraph that the book names this magnetic field as perispirit. Again, here, another very important point for me is, the all interaction or exchange of influences in the whole universe occur via these magnetic fields. If we had said that both in our hydrogen cosmos and in our daily life, all of our everything, all of our exchanges, all of our influences, all of our gatherings and separations are because of the magnetic fields we exert to each other, it would not be meaningful for most of us. But now, after learning about the nature of matter, we may understand it a little bit better. Yes, we said that each matter has a magnetic field and consequently, all building blocks of life, that is atoms, molecules and cells have their magnetic fields, and we call this electromagnetic force. And now we know as a fact that in the universe nothing, I mean no matter with another matter, are in direct contact. That is, if we handshake with a few friends, actually our hands don't touch each other. Or if we take a glass of water, we think that our hand touches the glass, but actually, there is no contact between our hand and the glass. What happens is only the electromagnetic force between the electrons spinning in the atoms of our fingers and the electrons spinning in the atoms of the glass.
We had mentioned before, but I'd like to repeat here that there is a very informative documentary, What the Bleep Do We Know? It was published in 2004 and the visuals in this movie may be very helpful for our friends. You can find it on YouTube. Yes, we think that we touch, but actually, a field interaction happens between subatomic particles.
Exactly. And by watching that movie and all the knowledge we now have, we can understand this fact. We do everything in our daily life by the interaction of the magnetic fields, there is nothing else. For example, this online lecture or the recording of it is possible by the interaction of the magnetic fields. Or a simpler example, we speak and hear, or all of our other sensations is possible by the interaction of magnetic fields. And beyond this, we will read soon in this book, our brain has a magnetic field, a center, and all of our interactions with our being occur by this magnetic field. Also, all interactions of the plans in duty also happen this way. For example, we have an idea. From where this idea came? How it came? These happen by the incoming influences to the magnetic field of our being from the magnetic fields of the helping beings, and in turn, by the influences coming from our being to the magnetic field of our brain. Eventually, these are expressed by our language, by our actions and deeds. But from the smallest to most sublime, all these happen by the interactions of the magnetic fields. Later in the book we will read that beings in duty related to our planet are settled in the sun because the matter of the sun is easy to change. And what is this change? Changes in the magnetic field of the sun. It is easy to change because the matter there is simple. Because the first element, that is hydrogen, is easy to transform and change, those beings utilized the matter of sun.
And don't we see that when there are explosions of sun spots, the Earth's magnetic field is affected by these, then some disturbances happen in our communication systems. And our bodies, because they have magnetic fields, feel this, sleep cycle may get affected, some sensations get heightened or slowed. And I think, even in the predictions of astrologers, these interactions of magnetic fields prevail because we see that they study the effects of the planets on Earth in old records, and then if they detect similar conjunctions of the planets in astrological charts of today, they make predictions about similar sociological events or natural disasters, etc. So, maybe we can say that we are becoming more aware of the effects of those interactions of the magnetic fields. And here, normally all those people are online for this video. Together we focus and make a magnetic field. Each of us, in his or her place, are a part of this field. And whatever influence we include in this field, be it attention, ideas, comments, questions, and focus, make this field stronger and more influential. Or in telepathy, in prayers, in healing, the same mechanism works. And, as in the saying, as above, so below. The divine system and the beings in duty also utilize the same mechanism, but in a greater scale, of course.
Yes, and also. I think I happened to read this info 5 or 6 years ago. Researchers discovered that besides the solar flares, there are portals of magnetic fields between Earth and Sun. They call these portals X points. So, such discoveries perfectly overlap with what I read in this book. Because these portals are formed via the process of magnetic reconnection, they mingle lines of magnetic force from the Sun and Earth and join these lines in a crisscross pattern. That's why they are called X points, and changes in the magnetic field of the Sun immediately enters through these portals into the ionosphere of Earth. And we know that all meteorological events in our world begin to occur starting from the ionosphere layer. Well, earthquakes are triggered by this, therefore all formations and transformations these beings in duty want to realize utilize the effect of the changes in the Sun. And we know that we are in the last period of this cycle of the world. Of course, we don't know its time and date, but we understand that this will be done by the changes in the magnetic field of our world. The book states the presence of a sojourner planet and how the approaching of this planet changes the magnetic field of the solar system, in turn, of the Sun, and in turn, of our planet. Recently, all of us talk about the climate change, and all those changes are due to the changes in the magnetic fields of our planet and all of us.
Yes, let's stop reading for this evening. Let me check the chat box if there are questions related to the pages we read. And, I see a related question from a friend. As the matter universe begins to emerge from the amorphous matter, is there a unity of consciousness like the unified field theory posits? I mean, instead of small spirit parts, is there a single spirit or consciousness at that initial stage?
Let's not say small spirit parts but continue with the terminology of the book. Let's say novice spirits. That is, spirits that have less experience and knowledge about the universe yet. And until each spirit reaches the stage of being, they need to gain their experience.
And if talk about the consciousness at that stage, please remember that we talk with the terminology of the hydrogen realm. The book states that spirits are super-universe truths. So we can't know anything about the quality or content of those super-universe truths. And the book never states such a thing like spirits were a unity and then get fragmented, etc. Maybe you can guess the most frequently asked question about spirits. What is the number of spirits? How can we describe super-universe truths quantitatively? If you watch our previous videos we made so far, and if you read the book until the point we read this evening, you can see that what was stated in the book is all about the developmentary stages of matter until motion begins in matter. However, we now live in the matter universe that is in infinite motion. And again, the book states that we can perceive and understand only a narrow scale of this infinite spectrum of motions, and there are other levels above and below of our narrow scale of perceptions. And even these subtler levels above and cruder levels below are still matter of the matter universe. Yes, with these words, let's say good evening to our friends. We made a good start with dear Tümerhan, and we are looking forward to meeting you next week. Please keep on sending your questions and comments. Good evening, everyone.